Hello, my name is Matt Davies, and this is a very brief discussion about the what, why, and how of political cartoons. What are they, why do they have the forms that they do, and how are they conveying their meanings? So it can be said that a political cartoon is merely one with more of a political rather than a social message. Political cartoons, their images and meanings, carry so much weight and power in the form of rhetorical analysis that the New York Times has ceased to run them on a daily basis due to them stealing the attention away from the editorials that may appear alongside. Couple this with the thought that there are two types of typical readers of political cartoons: those who skim the image for meaning and content, and those who simply read the image, inferring deeper meaning through a greater sense of not only current events, but also of signifiers within the context of the work at hand. So what this means is that there are those within the general population who are either not versed in the typical signs and signifiers inherent to these types of rhetoric, or are perhaps just not familiar with the types of constructs inherent to this type of visual rhetoric. Either way, a brief look at some of the history of political cartooning, as well as some of the typical constructs, signs, and signifiers that are more prevalent today, may help with a greater understanding and appreciation of some of today's more prolific cartoonists, as well as their rhetoric within their works. So first, what are signs and signifiers? For Ferdinand Saussure, one of the founders of semiology, the relationship between the two is merely a matter of convention. An agreement of parties that in this instance aligns that a picture of a flying monkey and the term flying monkey are truly only one and the same due to pre-accepted understanding, and a familiarity with the Wizard of Oz, as the case may be. So, for our purposes, some of the best examples of signifiers are the elephant and the donkey, animals that have come to represent the major political parties in the United States, largely due to the work of early political cartoonists like Thomas Nast. Nast was such a staunch Republican, he saw fit to bestow the symbol of the jackass upon the party that had at the time stood with the southern plantation owners during the Civil War. Now, some signifiers are natural metaphors, or ones that we tend to pick up on naturally. Light and dark is an example of a natural metaphor. Here in this cartoon by Nast, Death is clothed in black against his lighter-colored counterparts, depicting the risk that passengers were taking riding the steam-powered trains at the time. Also notice the size of Death. He is larger than the rest of his traveling companions, helping to indicate his outsized influence. Or this cartoon by Pat Bagley, depicting Light as the truth shown by reporters on the issue of clerical sexual abuse. Another metaphor that is naturally understood is size, or the difference represented by large as opposed to small. Both of these concepts play out in Pat Bagley's cartoon, with the small, light-colored Pope defending the dark and monstrous issue of sexual abuse within the Catholic Church. But there's a third one hiding here as well, though not as obvious, and it's one we've been conditioned on since we were children. Have you guessed it yet? That ugly is bad and beauty is good? Well, the same holds true for political cartoons. In this image, drawn by Blanche Ames, we see two of these concepts at play as the ugly demons keep the beautiful woman from climbing out of the darkness and into the light, or in this case, progress. Through the use of labeling, something that comes into play quite often for both people and objects, we can see that the next rung of the ladder she must climb is the right to vote, while the demons of blind injustice and prejudice seek to send her crashing to the rocks of greed and ignorance below. Labeling and size come into play in Nick Anderson's work, calling into question the honor of allowing big oil into the Alaskan wilderness, with the sheer size of big oil overshadowing the beauty and fragility of the designated stand-in for the wildlands of Alaska. So now that we have some basics down, some ideas of the whys and hows, let's look at some of the more common constructs. Early cartoons were a single panel due to them being engraved lithographic images, a process that consumed a great deal of time, so everything needed to happen in a single image. At times, this led to some rather busy images, overflowing with text and captions, such as the depiction of the cheering on of the Boston Tea Party, or of the many tentacled Standard Oil bringing death and sickness to those it encompasses. While the single-panel construct still flourishes today, it has also given way to new possibilities as technology has improved, though much of the text has gone the way of the dodo. So, a few of the other constructs that have risen from the advent of technology are the split panel. Here in this cartoon by cartoonist Matt Davies, weird coincidence on the name, we see this design where two images are reliant upon one another to create the message. These new possibilities, the freedom offered by pen and pencil, led to a new breed of political cartoon, one pulled from off of the comics page by editors and deposited into the political section, two of these being Bloom County by Berkeley Breathed and Doonesbury by Gary Trudeau. These two strips turned the single-image standard into the possibility of a daily four-panel romp, through worlds full of contrived characters as well as real ones. Nowadays, I find myself holding on to the opinion section until the last, making sure that I am up to speed on the recent news before I turn to the day's political cartoon to see their take on the day's events. And just like the dailies, they have their characters too. Political cartoonist Pat Oliphant started his career in South Australia, drawing conservative cartoons, something he really wasn't inclined to do. In the early 60s, he added a character to his panel, giving a side opinion or insight into what was being viewed. This type of cartoon is known as an embedded panel. The character Oliphant created, Punk the Penguin, provided the artist a way to articulate his own voice through the panel. And while his employers at the time never seemed to catch on, the character did and endures to this day, as do many imitations and iterations. Notice the commentary coming from Punk looking onto the church gate, stating that not only does the bishop know, but that he has first dibs. We see this same type of editorial demonstrated in many of Pat Bagley's works, where an outside assessment of the image's main theme sets the tone for the whole piece. Bagley's world bears some explanation, like who are all these homogenous guys in suits, and why are all their faces painted orange recently? Essentially, how do we read Pat Bagley's cartoons? Let's take a look at a few and see. The cookie cutter, all essentially the same guys, yeah, they're the Utah State Legislature, a group nearly as homogenous as they are drawn. The extra guy in the boat lighting the cannon on the protesters, our very own Governor Gary Herbert. Okay, that's easy enough to grasp, right? But now, why are their faces painted orange half the time? For an answer to that, we need to go back several news cycles. So after the impeachment of Trump, notably quite orange himself, our legislators wrote a message of support for him, ashamed that Utah Senator Mitt Romney had voted to impeach our current president. Ever since then, they have all been depicted in orange face, an homage to the one that they have pledged fealty to, painting themselves orange in their own rhetoric. So, from engraved images laying out with more text than image to today's more streamlined pieces from artists like Bagley and Trudeau, Davies and Oliphant, the impact of these cartoons is immeasurable. And so, with an understanding of signifiers and staying on top of the news, political cartoons are not only an approachable form of rhetoric, but one that carries enough weight to almost have an unfair advantage over the rest of the printed page. They are an ever-evolving medium that has helped shape our country, as they themselves have been reimagined and found new life, new audiences, and new technologies with which to project themselves into the future of discourse. I will end with a public service announcement. In this day and age, I think we all need it. Thank you.